You read about these places, right, behind the Iron Curtain. They seem almost mythical, steeped in this heavy ideology.
hmm And then someone like Theodore Dalrymple comes along, or Anthony Daniel, some people know him as that.
Right, yeah. And he wasn't just reading about it, he went. He was a retired doctor, wrote for everyone from The Spectator to The New Statesman, even the BMJ.
Quite a range,
Yeah.
which gave him this unique perspective, didn't it? He could see past the slogans.
Totally. One minute he's dealing with, I don't know, someone with an axe in his surgery. The next he's in Albania, just observing how, like, even the airport felt stuck, frozen.
Yeah, that contrast he draws right at the start
Yeah.
at Tirana Airport, really grabs you. I mean, think about it. No rush, no duty-free madness.
Just stillness, like life deliberately slowed down.
And those old MiGs sitting there,
Huh?
Soviet or Chinese jets,
Hmm.
relics, symbols of that whole isolated world. It sets the scene perfectly.
It really does. And it's not just the lack of shops or whatever, it's the little details he picks up, like
Right.
that pleasantly seedy garden.
And no smell of jet fuel. Weirdly peaceful almost.
Almost. Until he drops the phrase, Albanian appendectomy.
Oof. Yeah. Brings you right back down to earth, doesn't it? The reality of limited medical care in that isolation.
Exactly. So today we're doing a deep dive into his book, The Wilder Shores of Marx, Journeys in a Vanishing World.
We'll be looking at his travels through communist Albania, North Korea, Romania, Cuba, and Vietnam. Basically trying to get a feel for these places through his eyes.
Yeah, it's all based on his personal accounts, so this isn't going to be some dry history lecture, folks.
No, definitely not. It's more like a journey through these vivid, sometimes shocking, sometimes mundane observations he made.
We'll unpack, daily life, propaganda, how power worked, the human side of it all.
So let's start with Albania. That airport scene really kicks it off.
Right. And as he travels out into the country, that feeling of isolation, of being technologically, well, behind, it just continues.
You picture these old tractors, right? Soviet era, probably. Moving so slowly.
And huge state farms, mostly worked by women using hand tools. Feels like stepping back in time.
It does, even though the official image was all about industry, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Factory chimneys, proletarian smoke, all that.
Yeah, the classic iconography. But the actual tech seemed pretty dated. And the social vibe he describes, drab clothes, hardly any traffic or ads, very subdued.
Sort of gray, almost. What's interesting is when he compares it to the rest of the Eastern Bloc, he calls Albania mild in comparison.
Mild, really?
Well, yeah, but then he immediately says, hold on, the fear was pervasive. Self-censorship. So maybe not outwardly as harsh as some places, but the control went incredibly deep.
Okay, that makes sense. And under Enver Hoxha, that control was intense.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Hoxha was exceptionally paranoid, even for a communist dictator, and deeply anti-religious.
Comparing religion to venereal disease, that's aggressive.
It really is. And the personality cult. Hoxha's picture everywhere, things renamed after him, constant, unavoidable.
Like that museum he visited, he called it a cathedral of untruth.
Powerful phrase, isn't it? And that feeling he describes of being complicit just by staying silent while history is being rewritten.
Like claiming Albanian partisans beat the Nazis all by themselves.
Exactly. It shows how these regimes need to control the past to justify the present.
And the weirdest part, maybe, is that alliance between Hoxha and those, like, upper-middle-class British communists.
Yeah. And British intelligence involved. Kim Philby even playing a role in getting Hoxha into power. It's a bizarre historical footnote.
Makes you wonder about the strange alliances ideology can create, right?
Definitely. Then he gets into the economy. The goods, poor quality, awful packaging.
He makes a great point there. Production wasn't about what people wanted or needed. It was just disconnected.
Yeah.
For quotas, maybe.
Pretty much. Divorced from human purpose, as he puts it. Which explains why everything was so shoddy.
Even the rust. He talks about communist-era rust like it was a specific type.
Huh. Yeah, like the system's flaws seeped into the metal itself. It's those little observations that make it so vivid.
And the architecture in Tirana? Those few lovely old Turco-Parisian houses crushed between impersonal apartment blocks.
Built for a statistical life, he says.
Yeah.
No aesthetic sense. Just function, but not even good function. Prioritizing the collective over any individual feeling.
And you couldn't just leave either. Heavily guarded borders, people shot, trying to escape. The coast, the lakes totally dead, inactive.
A nation turned inward, sealed off, fearful.
The pollution, too. Elbasan, the steel town, crops covered in soot.
And the hint that maybe they didn't install filters because of some political fight. Ideology literally poisoning the air.
Even nature felt controlled. Poker deck by the lake, extraordinary deadness on the waterfront. Like, even the ducks had to follow the party line.
It's that pervasive artificiality, which brings us to the knitting combine in Corsi.
Wow. Okay, yeah, let's get into this. Blaring martial music.
Women hunched over Chinese sewing machines. A Hoxha shrine, of course. And those slogans.
Knitters of the world unite. You have nothing to drop but your stitches. You couldn't make it up.
It's almost Kafka-esque. Darkly funny, but utterly grim. And the clothes they made were apparently hideous colors.
Plus, the production figures seemed totally fake. Over quota, always.
A perfect example of the gap between the propaganda-happy workers exceeding targets and the grim reality.
And that exhibition, Albania Today, showcasing all their products.
Bottled plums to ECG machines, all looking cheap and nasty.
The real point wasn't pride, was it? It was concealment, a nationwide Potemkin village.
Precisely. Just trying to hide the failures. Okay, shall we shift to North Korea?
Right, North Korea. Dalrymple's journey starts with this meeting in Islington, London.
And the delegation sounds, well, intense. A professional proletarian with a fake accent. A fiercely anti-Zionist activist.
Sets the stage, doesn't it? For a truly bizarre trip. You wonder what drew these Westerners to such an extreme ideology.
It's a question that hangs over the whole account, and then Pyongyang itself. Disturbing grandeur, he calls it.
That massive, unfinished hotel, shaped like a rocket, built out of spite against South Korea, supposedly.
It speaks volumes, doesn't it? Projecting power, even if it's just a concrete shell. Hollow.
Then there's the Zhush idea. Man as the master of everything. Sounds almost empowering on the surface.
Almost, but then you hear about people secretly longing to read Shakespeare and Dickens as an escape.
Shows that conflict, right? Between the state's rigid ideology and just basic human desires. Connection, understanding.
Totally. Kim Jong-il wanting to remold people into communist men of a Jewish type.
Like reprogramming humans.
Yeah. And Dalrymple contrasts that with the sheer humanity in Shakespeare, even in the villains. That complexity.
Then he meets those really hardline communists, the ones advocating torture.
Genuinely frightening. Their fanaticism, almost gleeful, and dismissing eugenics as a solved problem.
Chilling. It shows how ideology can just override basic morality, doesn't it, when taken to extremes?
Absolutely. Individuals become just tools for the grand plan.
Yeah.
And that militarized friendliness he saw.
Pedestrians waving stiffly, robotically at the tourist buses.
So unnatural. Performative loyalty. Creepy.
And the cult of personality around Kim Il-sung's statues. Pictures everywhere. Like Hoxha, but maybe even more intense.
It makes you wonder, were they believers or cynics? Did Kim Il-sung really think he was infallible?
Or was it just about power? Hoxha dying peacefully after 40 years of triumphant psychopathy, as Dalrymple puts it. That's a sobering thought.
It really is. The Martyrs' Cemetery, too. Another example of manufactured reality.
Elaborate, but sterile. Soft organ music. But the busts probably had no connection to real martyrs.
Propaganda disguised as remembrance. Because real, independent memory is dangerous to the state.
Same with that model school visit. Immaculate classrooms, labs, all unused. Just a performance.
A facade for visitors, like Gwangbok Street during the festival.
Right. Staged liveliness, sealed off from the real city, police spotlights keeping onlookers in check, like a movie set.
And department store number 1. That anecdote is just mind-bending.
The shoppers and assistants acting out buying things.
Yeah, this totally meaningless pantomime. And it ends with them distributing brown plastic wash bowls, then immediately collecting and repiling them.
What? Why?
It's pure power play, humiliation. Forcing people to participate in an obvious, pointless lie shows their utter subjugation.
Utterly dehumanizing, like the mass game.
Breathtaking scale, yes.
Yeah.
20,000 kids moving in perfect sync, but terrifying.
Individuals reduced to pixels in a giant picture. Cogs in a machine.
And Dalrymple refusing to stand when Kim Il-sung entered. That small act of defiance.
It stands out, doesn't it? A flicker of individual conscience against overwhelming pressure.
And the crowd's robotic obedience. It shows the regime's power, but maybe also its weakness. You know, it's that collective noncompliance could shatter the whole thing.
Interesting point. The May Day rally sounds just as staged.
Over-the-top adulation for the great leader, weird international delegations, guerrilla group.
Oh, plus the Scandinavians protesting with banners. Brave. And Robert Mugabe giving some bland speech. Surreal.
It's all about projecting legitimacy, even if it means embracing questionable allies. And the rules for foreigners. Segregation, no talking to Korean women.
Driven by racial prejudice, he says. That's surprising.
It is, underscores the paranoia. But even then, He hears whispers of discontent from the women.
And amidst all this weirdness, you get moments of human connection, like Mr. Kim, the minder.
Seemingly charming. But then he warns Dalrymple off going to a Tiananmen Square solidarity meeting, a reminder of the surveillance.
Can't tell what's real, can you? Genuine feeling versus performance?
That's the dilemma Dalrymple wrestles with, showing kindness versus acknowledging the oppressive system Mr. Kim represents.
And the visit to the model family, the wrestler, all privileged, all fake.
Just reinforces the pervasive artificiality.
And even when they leave, the paranoia follows them. Questioned by a special branch back at Heathrow.
Yeah, despite just coming from North Korea, shows how ingrained suspicion can be, even for those who should know better.
Okay, let's move on. Romania. A different feel again, right?
Yeah, Dalrymple notes straight away. Here, the official ideology wasn't really believed. Not like in Albania or North Korea. People were cynical.
That's a key difference. And the history. The Soviet-engineered takeover, the small Communist Party, that awful Danube Black Sea Canal project.
Brutal beginnings, shaky foundations, lots of suffering.
And the hotels. The socialist Hiltonian.
Huh, perfect description. Shoddy, uncomfortable, and you just assume you're being bugged.
Yeah.
Standard Iron Curtain experience.
The restaurants, too. Bad food, limited choice, a far cry from Romania's pre-war reputation.
And hidden microphones instead of nice presentation says a lot about priorities.
Bucharest, the Paris of the Balkans. He describes the lovely old architecture.
And then contrasts it with Ceausescu's destructive systemization,
Yeah.
tearing down history for uniform blocks.
But he noticed the women's elegance, a subtle defiance, maintaining individuality.
I think so. A small act of resistance against the enforced drabness. It speaks volumes about the human spirit.
Daily life sounded grim, though. Overcrowded buses on methane tanks, sad little cafes.
Yeah, that single chemical cake at the fancy hotel coffee shop. Says it all. Scarcity. Erosion of simple pleasures.
And the Central Civic, that monstrous boulevard built over demolished homes and churches.
The ultimate symbol of Ceausescu's ego. And his systemization plans, trying to erase the difference between town and country, creating this gray uniformity.
So much for the communist ideal of harmony.
Exactly. And those shops that sold nothing. Potemkin stores with fake luxury goods.
Just for show. A total contradiction of their own supposed materialism. Hilarious if it weren't so sad.
And the People's Palace. Enormous. Grotesque. Built with manual labor to emphasize the individual's insignificance.
Just a monument to state power, really. How did this affect ordinary Romanians?
He describes their faces as inscrutable. People retreated inwards. Inner emigration as a defense mechanism.
The psychological toll must have been immense, living under constant surveillance.
He got advice in London about how to handle being watched, and driving that obvious Dacia with special plates. The control was tangible.
Shortages everywhere, black market thriving, coffee and Kent cigarettes as real currency, classic planned economy failure.
And the fear. He says it went deeper than just physical threat, almost existential.
No organized opposition because of individualism and securitate infiltration.
Yeah. Ceausescu's secret police were everywhere. That student setting himself on fire and nobody really noticing. Chilling apathy born of fear.
His meetings with intellectuals sound poignant in their old flats, full of sorrow and anger.
And Dalrymple feeling like an outsider, unable to truly share their burden. Plus, the irony of writing this just before the revolution.
Unbelievable timing. Gives his observations extra weight.
That Broyle painting he mentions, The Massacre of the Innocents, he sees it reflecting totalitarian brutality.
And his insight about propaganda. It's not about making you believe the lie.
It's about humiliating you into repeating it publicly, forcing you to show subservience. That's a key takeaway.
And then there's the debate. Did communism change people's souls, as one historian believed?
Dalrymple wasn't so sure. He saw persistent hatred for the regime, hidden under layers of hypocrisy.
The Popescu affair is fascinating, too. The Romanian who discovered insulin but got sidelined.
Yeah, nationalism and politics interfering with scientific credit. A sad story.
And the brain drain. That historian feeling like the last intellectual left. Devastating.
And being asked to smuggle out books, national treasures, yet effectively banned. The absurdity of it.
The Proofs of Love Museum, showcasing worthless gifts to the Ceausescus.
Utterly kitsch. A perfect parody of personality cults. Like that photo of Ceausescu in a silver suit explaining farming to peasants, just ludicrously staged. His travels outside Bucharest show variety, though, right? Yeah, Ploiesti, polluted and bleak. Brasov, but less oppressive. Târgu Mureș, Cluj-Napoca. You see shortages, ugliness, but also resilience.
That single plastic pot plant being moved around in Playesti. Strangely symbolic.
And encounters with people, the waitress, the elegant diners, and clues showing sparks of humanity enduring.
But it ends with that reminder of the state's presence helping the drunk student, then getting questioned by the security.
Can't escape it. Okay, Vietnam, big
Yeah.
contrast, he says.
Yeah, straight away. Saigon life, shops, cafes, less obvious political stuff compared to Albania or North Korea.
A different vibe entirely. He notes the physical grace of the Vietnamese. Feels clumsy by comparison.
Then sees this bizarre folk performance with a Russian extolling solidarity to Vietnamese who clearly don't understand him.
Another moment of ideological absurdity disconnected from reality.
And little details like the hotel lift rugs still saying good morning, afternoon, evening from the American era.
Echoes of the past the new regime hadn't quite erased. Like that secondhand bookshop.
Full of books Americans left behind, and playing English language tapes with ironically suitable dialogues about things being unavailable.
A culture caught between worlds. Reading that 1963 Saigon booklet must have been emotional too.
Yeah, a glimpse of a lost world that existed in his own lifetime. Gone forever.
Even the ads, mixed with official notices about the state of siege, paint a picture of a society under pressure.
Meeting Nguyen, the former South Vietnamese officer, his immediate condemnation of communism.
Gives you that other perspective, doesn't it? Someone who lived through the change?
Mm.
And the appreciation for old French architecture. Interesting.
Aesthetics surviving politics. Then the run-in with the security official.
And Dalrymple playing dumb to cool things down. A necessary survival skill in those places.
Trying to read the Communist Party Congress report sounds painful, like Macaulay's scathing review he quotes.
Tedious, self-congratulatory stuff. And the economic reforms, finally deciding to pay peasants for food after 50 years.
Took them long enough to figure that out. Dalrymple's irony is sharp there.
But then the other Nguyen, the cyclo driver, has a slightly more positive view of the general secretary, suggests maybe things were easing up a bit.
A gradual thaw, perhaps. Telling political jokes, anyway.
Small signs. Then you get the contrast. Government officials getting free petrol, while the driver's brother believes in lucky teeth numbers.
State power meets personal superstition, and the newspaper hiding Mary McCarthy's controversial book title, Curated Information.
The War Museum photos sound harrowing, though, that contested image of the soldier with the head.
And the Cu Chi tunnels, confronting the brutal reality of the war.
Which leads to Bin's disillusionment, the Viet Cong veteran saying, "We believed."
But later admitting Ho Chi Minh deceived them. That's powerful, coming from him.
And the local elections. Compulsory voting, single candidate, a total sham.
Imagining General Taylor raging in the old U.S. Embassy, reflecting on the folly of it all.
Then Hue, the old imperial capital. Fading culture, frivolous last emperor, a world away from communist austerity.
The quiet tombs, peaceful because war kept tourists away. Tu Duc's sad inscription.
And Ho Chi Minh wanting cremation, seeing himself alongside Marx and Lenin, his lifelong commitment.
Hanoi's French feel survived, though. Leafy streets, the Metropole Hotel.
Seedy charm, he calls it. And Mary McCarthy's romanticized view of Vietnamese communism.
Her interview with Pham Van Dong, who rejected a socialist consumer society, seems naive in hindsight.
Especially given the boat people exodus later, the tragic human cost.
McCarthy almost lost faith then, considered writing to Pham Van Dong, but still clung to the idea of a purer socialism.
Shows the power of those ideals, even against harsh evidence. Which brings us finally to Cuba.
Right, Cuba, another variation. Dalrymple acknowledges potential social gains under Castro.
But questions if Castro is the only reason, pointing to Costa Rica achieving similar things without revolution. A fair point.
And Castro's speeches, endless, self-absorbed, delivered to clapping crowds.
Cult of personality again, no dissent allowed. And defending Stalinism, calling revelations poison.
Dismissing the murder of millions as an unquestionable mistake. Shocking.
Shows his ideological rigidity.
Mm-hmm.
And critiquing any reforms towards capitalism, very dogmatic.
He argues the shortages were deliberate, a tool of control, making people dependent, infantilized by bureaucracy just to buy beer.
Ensures docility. And the empty shops named after things they don't have, alongside constant slogans, Yer si, Che Marti.
That disconnect again, between the slogans and the reality, the forced veneration of Jose Marti.
Dalrymple questions the ethics of ramming nationalism into kids' heads like that.
And the anti-Americanism, hindering practical progress. Dalrymple felt almost pro-American in reaction.
Propaganda in art, too. Marti portraits used for anti-U.S. hate messages, twisting creativity,
The torchlit parade, staged, but met with apathy by people on balconies listening to their own music. You can't force enthusiasm.
Even kids' books had dodgy references, like to Dzerzhinsky and those old books from the women's club.
Pornous tracks, gossip mags, a Soviet boxing manual, a weird mix, glimpses into private lives.
And the hypocrisy over prostitution, officially eradicated, but young men soliciting tourists for shoes.
Blatant contradiction. Some of the other books he found sound random too. The Great Mistake about Hoover.
Just snapshots of what was available. He quotes that chilling bit about revolutionary ideology.
Humanity needing to be forcibly liberated from the muck of ages.
Yeah. Zero respect for individual rights in that view, and his take on Castro and Che.
Adolescents stuck after early military success, unable to mature because of constant praise.
A compelling psychological angle. Then the markets. Potemkin tourist shops versus grim local ones. Stark inequality.
And Cuban tourism itself, unattractive, tourists uninterested in reality, guides just keeping them amused, controlled, unsatisfying.
He recounts Che's victory at Santa Clara, derailing the train. Decisive.
But contrast it with the badly planned Moncada attack earlier and Castro's pride in lying about it afterwards and ignoring the soldiers killed.
Plus, the communists at the time actually condemned Moncada as putschist. Irony.
And museums using childlike paintings to glorify it all, shaping history from day one.
The Carlos Finley story is fascinating, too. The Cuban who figured out yellow fever transmission.
But Americans denied him credit, favoring Walter Reed, nationalist resentment hurting science.
In that journalist reflection. Latin American reporters lacking resources compared to Westerners who might not get the local reality. Important point.
Dalrymple ends Cuba with self-doubt, though, right? Listing his observations, wondering if he got it wrong.
Before reaffirming his conclusions, that critical self-reflection is crucial. Then a final nod to Sendero Luminoso in Peru, another grim outcome of extremism.
So pulling it all together, what are the big themes from Dalrymple's journeys?
Well, clearly that huge gap between the ideology's promises and the actual, often grim reality on the ground, that's constant.
Right. And the nature of totalitarian power built on lies, needing manufactured consent, crushing dissent.
Definitely. But also the resilience of ordinary people. Their suffering, yes, but also their dignity, their ways of coping in these vanishing worlds.
And the unintended consequences. Grand plans often leading to disaster.
Which makes you think, how does this connect to today? We still deal with propaganda, power plays, narrative control.
So what lessons can we take from these places, even though they've mostly changed?
Well, I think it highlights the enduring importance of truth, doesn't it? Of critical thinking. Of protecting individual freedom and agency against systems that want to control everything.
Yeah, it leads to that final thought, really. In a world still wrestling with these big ideological fights and the manipulation of information.
What can these vanished worlds teach us about holding on to truth? Or maybe, given the horrific human cost we saw.
How do we balance striving for a better society, for social justice?
And the absolute need to protect individual liberty. That's the ongoing challenge, isn't it? Complex questions, still incredibly relevant today.